Oh, wow.
Saw it twice, so I was like, oh my god.
That was just weird.
I always used to see a light coming up,
Yeah.
like a headlight, but there was nobody there.
Oh, it's just disappeared.
Good evening and welcome to a slightly different version of Truth Proof. My name's Paul Bestall, host of Mysteries and Monsters, which I'm sure some of you will have heard Paul appear on over the years. And this week, Paul has kindly asked me if I would like to host the show and dive into Paul's experiences and some of the phenomena that's been going on up and down the East Coast and Bempton. And we're going to have a nice chat about some of his cases and take some questions from you guys. So I hope that'll be of interest to you all, and we just need to wait for Paul to come and join us, and we can start the conversation.
Thank you very much, Paul, and great to be here on what is your live stream tonight, my friend. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. Like I say, Paul, it's always good to have a chat with you, mate, and have some conversation and stuff. And it's we've been talking between ourselves. I mean, I've been doing my show 7 years, and you appeared at the tail end of the first year, mate. So we've been chatting and sharing ideas and thoughts and helping each other out since that point. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you and your team.
Absolutely. And as I say, you've been up to cliffs and into these locations, and I'm sure you might get up maybe even this year, if not definitely next year. So it's brilliant. And I'm so pleased that you said you'd do this. There's a reason for this, guys, for people in chat. And thanks everybody for support. I couldn't think of anybody better to do it than Paul, because we get on great. But I noticed in the comments when I did a stream, I don't know, a few days ago, somebody said, Paul doesn't tell us anything anymore. All he does is talk shop. And that's not a dig at you, whoever said it. It was a kick up backside for me, because I thought, something, you're right. It's good to talk about some of these experiences rather than... I love throwing ideas about and making people's cogs turn a little bit, and my own, because I like what comes back. That's why I do it. But it's also good to talk about the cases. People love listening to things like Hummingbee and listening to the UFO cases. And I thought, well, this lady, a man, I'm not sure who, but asked the question and put it out there. And I thought, yeah, they're absolutely spot on, and it would make a change. We've just sort of mixed it up a bit, guys. And if you want us to do it again, I'm sure we will do in future. And you might have heard Paul come on earlier. Well, when he first came on, I couldn't hear it, but Paul's the host of Mysteries and Monsters podcast, which is brilliant. I recommend everybody to go over there and have a look at it. You'll find it on YouTube. But here we go. You're in charge, Paul. What are we doing?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, like I say, yeah, great idea. And I think this is one of the things when you work in this particular field, like you say, Paul, sometimes you can kind of have too many ideas whirring away in your head. And so sometimes you can kind of get lost in the minutiae of what's been going on. I mean, for me, obviously, as long as we've known each other, the thing that's always kind of intrigued me is at what point, coming from your history and your interest in UFOs and your personal experiences growing up, to what started happening when you moved out towards the East Coast, at what point do you think you stepped over the threshold of ufology into high strangeness?
Yeah, as regards, because we're all involved in it for our own reasons, aren't we? Everybody in chat's got their own niche, their own part of why they've become involved. And as you know, for me, it was the experiences in childhood. But there's much more to this subject than just my experiences in childhood. And I didn't want to become one of those. We use this word researcher as though we're something special. Everybody in chat's a researcher, as you know. There's people in there that dive into great detail about things, far more than I do, Paul. And so when the questions come in about the cryptids, you can't deny it. When people start asking you about the cryptid phenomena, and you think, well, I've only been involved in the alien abduction phenomena because I think that's what's happened to me, so I'm not going to get involved in anything else. You've got to, is the word diversify? I don't think it is. You've just got to throw yourself into it all and treat everybody as though, until you find out otherwise. I mean, some people you can get a good idea that they might not be talking rubbish, but they believe what they're talking about. And you can see plausible explanations, but when you've got standard locations coming up every time and similar reports coming out from those locations, there's a truth to it and you can't ignore it. I mean, your podcast, Mysteries and Monsters, there's the word. I never thought I'd be interested in anything that people visually, when they've seen these things, would term a monster, but that's what people are seeing. And how hard it is for people to bend their heads around it. That's what they're seeing, and I'll give those people time. You do. People in chat do. This is a safe place for people, and just like your podcast is. So I suppose I got involved in it when I finished work. But not fully. It sounds like I've packed in forever, doesn't it? But I was fortunate. I packed in work on my building site. I looked at bricklayers. I looked at joiners. They're walking about with bad knees, bad backs, all sort of wore out. When they get in the 60s, they're even worse than when they're in the 40s. I thought, I don't want this. I've worked hard all my life, and if I can manage, not with a great income, but if I can manage and I don't owe anybody up, this is what I want to do, and I just love it. I absolutely love what I'm doing. So that's when I threw myself into it a lot more than I were doing. Everything were whirring around in my head, Paul. I think like everybody in chat, like yourself, all these thoughts and ideas are there, and your experiences and what people have told you, it's all there, but there's a time and a place. And bringing 4 girls up, bringing your kids up, bringing everybody's kids up in chat, it doesn't allow. It doesn't allow. You've got to have that space to be able to do that, unless you're born with a silver spoon and you can just do it from day one, which I've never been able to do. Whether that answers anything really, but
yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose it is. It's one of those
Paul,
things, I think.
Paul B, turn the volume up on your microphone, if possible, Paul. That's what somebody just said in chat.
Hopefully that'll be better. I'll try and speak a bit clearer.
No, that's cool. So
I mean, it's one of those things, I think, Paul, because one of the things that always struck me when I first heard those conversations, the first time I heard you when you appeared on Howard Hughes's The Unexplained, I don't know, 10 years ago now, probably, Paul, was the fact I was always struck, because the thing that always I found quite frustrating is, because I like the whole Fortean sphere, be it ghosts, creatures, strange stories of weird encounters, UFOs, whatever, I often used to get frustrated where you would come across certain cases in all kinds of fields, and when certain things happened that were outside the wheelhouse of the person doing the investigating, Paul, often they would just not be interested in that. And I've spoken to so many people over the years. Tony Healy's a prime example, who's a brilliant researcher from Australia. He's done a lot of work in regards to yowies, phantom black cats, but he's also done poltergeists. He's the same kind of thing. And he was always saying about the times that he'd been to, say, Bluff Creek in California, where the famous Bigfoot film from 1967 was filmed, Paul. Yeah. And when he went there on a kind of like a monster hunting pilgrimage, he went around the world for a year, just working there. He ended up becoming a lumberjack in Canada for a bit. He was talking to so many people about these other things that were happening in places like Bluff Creek, which there was a spate of black cat sightings, a spate of lake creatures, river monsters being seen, UFOs above the forest, but nobody who was going there was interested in anything other than Bigfoot. Whereas what you've kind of ended up having to sort of grapple with, I suppose, is the fact that it's just pulled you in directions I don't think you would have ever imagined if you could have had this conversation with yourself 20 years ago, perhaps, Paul.
You're absolutely spot on, and I'm glad, well, I'm not glad you've gone in that direction. You have, ever since I've known you. And I think that everybody who comes on Cliff Tops with us, not everybody, but the bulk of the people on Cliff Tops and the other locations realise that there's so much more to this than lights in the sky. And that's what we've got to do. I mean, there's UFO organisations, isn't there? And they emit anything within the report, like you've said, that doesn't conform with a UFO report, what they would deem as a UFO report, which is ridiculous, really, because even if we don't understand the whys and the wherefores, there's got to be some ingredient in there that somebody one day will understand why so many things and so many diverse things are being thrown up within the areas of high strangeness, not just the UFO, just like the ghost hunters that maybe don't want to look into other types of phenomena that present in the areas. And I think, as we'll use the word loosely, as the words researchers, we've got to look at it all, throw that net out and let's just see what we catch, because we've got to look at it all. And that's what I like about the people in this chat, because we get some great people, great questions, thinking of things that I've never thought of. Same on your podcast, and it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant.
I suppose for me, and probably most of the people watching us now, Paul, the one case I think that jumps out straight away when we're talking about a mixture of phenomena going on is what happened at Hummerby.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it was also the first time I ever heard you speak when you did the Outer Limits conference back in Pontefract in 2019, Paul. That was the first time I'd ever seen you speak live. And you were covering that case on that particular day. I suppose when you look back, do you think that's the case that kind of holds the high standard for weirdness? Because what started off as what would seem to be a pretty unusual encounter, you would suggest, just deviated into complete high strangeness on a variety of fields. We've got all kinds of ingredients in this particular case that I would imagine you'd never come across before.
No, it will literally off the scale, Hummerby, and there's still lots of mileage in it, Paul, and I know there's people out there that have got information on Hummerby, and it's difficult because obviously that they might never come forward with it. One of the witnesses, who I always deliberately don't use his name, there's more information there, but I've got to respect confidence. I've got to respect what I'm told, and I don't have to, if that makes sense. I could not use name and just absolutely bolt lid off it, but I'm not going to do out of respect. But Hummerby had everything, and still does have everything, in my opinion. And it started so subtly. And that's why I throw all these little hooks out at people, because, I wonder if we're not creating it. I don't mean that we're somehow building the phenomena, but it's as the harder we look at it, the harder we think about it, the more it becomes prominent. And, as you know, Hummerby started with what people would deem as poltergeist activity, so subtle, little movement of things, something being thrown through the air. And as they became aware of it, the phenomenon almost almost grew to their awareness. And we'd even got a cryptid sighting in it, and that was the boss when he were left behind that night, and everybody else had gone home. When I say everybody, there were only probably Dave's mum and dad will have gone before Dave, because they used to come most nights. Then there'd be Dave and Andrew left, they'd go, and boss were left to lock up. And that particular night, it's one night out of the 3-year period, unless he's not alluded to anything else, he's locking the gates up. And I don't think it would have been anything like what it's like today for security. These industrial estates. We've been going back to 1998, 96, 97, and he got an awful feeling, like he were being watched, like an unearthly feeling, and turned round, and there's the huge figure of the silhouette of, the way he described it to me, as of a Bigfoot on an industrial estate on the outskirts of a little village we slip into North Yorkshire with Hummerby, even though we're only on outskirts of East and North, which is impossible. It sounds impossible. So if you want to discredit your story, throw a Bigfoot in on edge of an industrial estate. Do you know what I mean? And
yes.
I just went back to the fence, took a big breath in fear, and it turned and disappeared into darkness. But why? Why would that present? What were the reasons? Is it just some kind of, I don't know, thin area where lots of things were coming through? As we say often, I mean, these are the reasons I tend to like to speak about other things, because I feel like I've done years and years of this, talking to you, talking to Howard, incidentally, we all miss, probably, I think, best radio host bar none. Absolutely.
And
but yeah, why would a Bigfoot present? And then you've got all this poltergeist, and there's an intent, there's an intelligence to it, there's something driving it. Because when Andrew would challenge it and ask it questions, you know, the coins flying about in the workshop or dropping from the air, the washers flying about. On one particular evening, even though he's been warned, the boss kept warning him to stop what he was doing. You know, there'll be some kind of payment for what you're going to get. You're going to get some kind of retribution for what you're doing. And he turns around and there's a coin coming towards him that smacked him clean in the head. And you think, well, a coin hit in your head, that's not too bad. It come full circle, left a mark on his head. His sons remember it because they were teenagers at the time. They remember him coming home. I mean, we've had Nick on here talking about his dad. Incidentally, and I'm not going to say any time soon, but Andrew, after he'd heard Nick talk about it, did say he'd come on and talk about it. I sort of held back on it because I didn't want Andrew to get bombarded with people, as in, he was just principal witness, isn't he, you know?
Yes.
But yeah, Ummanby had everything. And but it's the location itself, Paul. It's not just the what we've called the Hummanby incident. It's the location itself. I was down there about 2 months ago. I was travelling back from my daughter's in Caton. I was on my own, and I decided to run down onto Industrial Estate, park car up. Got talking to a lady with a dog. We've got my little dog, and we're just talking. And she was telling me about the people in the village knew that a flying saucer landed in the fields at the back. Doesn't sound like it's anything to do with the Hummanby incident. You know, all right, it could be just idle words, and it could be somebody mixing things up with what I've written about and what I'm talking about. But there's so many other things. We're so close to Flixton. We've got these accounts of the Flixton werewolf, you know, and then jumping back to Hummanby, we've got this cryptid sighting. And the guys said over that 3-year period, they would come out on a night. And remember, don't matter whether it's summer, winter, or whatever it is, you get a lot of moisture in the air in the early hours of the morning. And there'd be huge footprints on the cars. Huge footprints and on the motor vehicles. I don't want to mix the cars up with, you know, the wetlands, which are called the cars. Yeah. And no damage. Huge footprints. I mean, with best will in world, I reckon somebody 12, 13 stone gets up on the bonnet of a car, the roof and the boot, and walks across it. Eventually, there's going to be some damage. But these are huge footprints and there's no damage. Everything's on another level. Is it just trying to show us something? What is the point of what we've seen? It can't be ghost. These things can't be tracings, the tracings of some kind of relic hominid. Otherwise, surely they wouldn't walk up over the top of a car and disappear. They'd just walk through it. You know, I'm only talking from a human perspective of what we think we understand. But to me, whatever was happening wanted to be known, wanted to be observed. Just like that brilliant film, Paul, Poltergeist. And the more that they became aware of it, the more it interacted with them, didn't it? And that's what was happening there.
I suppose as well, like you say, often you'll come across these kinds of cases where there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the phenomena that's occurring. Like you say, I mean, what is the purpose of leaving footprints on cars? It serves nothing other than perhaps to cause confusion. But then again, Paul, maybe that's the point.
Maybe confusion is the thing, yeah.
It could be something that, I don't know, gives it the kind of energy or connection that it's searching for. Because if you looked at that in isolation, you would just think, well, that's very peculiar. And like you say, you know, strangely enough, I have experience of walking over cars in my younger days. So I know, even trying your very best, Paul, you're going to dent everything. You know what I mean? You're not going to leave that surface undamaged in some, you know, there's going to be some kind of purchase there that's going to show that something heavy has walked over it. But then also, why has it left a footprint? Has that happened after the moisture has occurred? And if so, then you start thinking, well, now we've got a time frame that you think, is this occurring between, I don't know, 3 a.m., 6 a.m.? And it kind of thinks, well, why is it occurring at that particular point? And I know a lot of people often look at that period of night around the world as like the magic time, really, for strange phenomena, Paul, regardless of what you're into. So it just seems that sometimes it's like it's teasing people with no real sort of end game in sight. It just seems to enjoy playing with people's emotions, I suspect.
I think, though, you know, Paul, I think it must have had an agenda. There must have been an end game to it. You know, we apologise if anybody's joined the chat and they've never heard anybody talk about the Hummanby incident. just get into the Truth Proof live streams from the past and you'll hear plenty about it. Or I think I've talked about it on Mysteries and Monsters. Go to Mysteries and Monsters and have a look. But you know, it were leaving piles of gravel on the cars most nights. Little perfectly formed piles of gravel on the people's cars. It wanted to be known, but I wrestle with the idea of who was driving it. And I say who because I'm bringing us into the physical now, because it's possible that one individual, I don't mean was controlling it like some kind of magician, but there was a powerful presence there that could drive the things that were happening. I mean, obviously I'm not saying obviously, but the military, if these guys are telling me the truth, I've got 3 men singing from same hymn sheet, one that doesn't want to talk, who I've spoken to quite a few times, but still very reluctant, but he's still telling me the same story as what other 2 have told me. The military were there. How did they know? How did they know? They weren't there over the 3-year period. They weren't there. Do you remember all those things that were happening, the big triangles that were seen in the sky? We think, because nobody kept a diary, we think like a few nights before the actual object landed. Military weren't there that night unless they were covertly observing. But when they did arrive, they arrived in force. They arrived, and there were roadblocks. It were really coordinated, and they knew it was going to happen. That's what I believe. They knew what was going to happen, and I make no bones about it. It's probably one of the most interesting cases I've ever looked into. There is another one, which I've never spoken about, which I can't speak about tonight. And there is another one from East Yorkshire that's got all those ingredients. And we're not talking about Wilsthorpe. But it also involved real hostility towards the witnesses. So I might be able to talk about that eventually, but I can't at the moment. But Wilsthorpe's probably just as interested as Hummonby, to be honest with you, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, you don't come across it very often where you get the authorities turning up. It would seem out of the blue, Paul, but like you suggest, you would imagine that they've been covertly keeping an eye on things, I would imagine, because you can see this on some cases. Bestall incident in Australia in 1966 is one of those where loads of strange military people turned up and started threatening people and taking property. I mean, one of the teachers took pictures of the object and that was taken off him, and there's never been rediscovered since that happened. You look at Kecksburg in the US, once again, the authorities turned up and allegedly took something away on the back of a flatbed truck. So it doesn't seem to occur occasionally. Often you can sometimes get bogged down in stories about men in black and things like that. But this is often a very different kind of thing, because it seems that they know what's happening, and therefore their main priority is to keep everything under wraps and basically intimidate and threaten the experiencers into silence.
Yeah, absolutely. Frightened into silence. And I think that's what happened in part to some of the witnesses at Hummonby. Andrew and Dave, I don't think they were intimidated and frightened. They were just Andrew, 1998, it's 2025. He still can't quite believe it. I've sat and spoke to him. I spoke to him at length this year, sat in his front room, and with his 2 sons, Nick and Dave. And when you listen to him, he's going, it can't have been real. It can't have been real. He says, there was a flying saucer thing down the compound, and I could see this glass dome on top and this little, well, it looked like an alien in top of it, but it can't have been real. And he's because he said it looked like a classic 1950s / 60s flying saucer. And if he's listening to this, Andrew, I'm not having a laugh at you, mate, because I know how genuine you are. So but that's how it was so surreal that he finds it can't be real. Yet at the same time, the military took hold of him, shook him about, threatened him, stay where you are, don't move. This is all on that same night. Do you know what I mean? And they did the same to Dave. They did the same to the boss. And but Andrew just believes it, for some reason, that it was staged. But for what end? Nobody's ever heard about it until I spoke about it. And Andrew would have never told me if it weren't that he accidentally, while they were doing some work at the club in Flamborough, and Jim, this Scottish military guy, were organising finances and overseeing work, they told him about it. One of his sons told him. Me and Jim are good friends. So that was it. You must tell my friend Paul Sinclair. And I bet Andrew thought, oh, bloody hell. Because I can see his house from my back garden. I'd known him 20 years. Do you know what I mean? His lad used to work with me. And that's how deep and how covered up they wanted to keep this. So Hummonby is a special case. And I mean, I'm throwing that out there, and I do it quite often. Somebody said, I'll just do this. Melanie Alexander, where's Les these days? Les has got his own things to do. I'll not put it up as a question because it isn't, but I get that asked that loads and loads of times. So you got Paul. But yeah, I mean, Andrew, once Cat were out at Bag, that's just the way of things. And he's been quite happy to talk about it since. He put me on to Dave, he put me on to the boss, and I'm still waiting. I'm still hoping. I'm contacted by a guy from Hummonby talking about some cryptid related stuff last week. Which I'm going to meet this following week. I'm going to meet this chap in Hummonby. I don't think it's connected to 1998, but it's once again the area is throwing these things up, Paul. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at what they experienced and what went on, it's kind of hard to get your head around anybody hoaxing it or staging it. And once again, for what point? And so, like you mentioned earlier, we've got the incident at Wilsthorpe, which once again, we have military intervention, intimidating people who, in those kinds of aspects, Paul, this is often the thing that I've always been impressed with you, you wonder how these people have dealt with trying to process what they've been through. Especially, like you said, with the guys at Hummonby, it took them 20 years to open up about it.
Yeah.
So they've been carrying that.
Yeah.
And you wonder, often when we hear people in real life talk about these particular experiences, as you said right at the beginning, it's a safe space and an avenue of protection for these people to be able to talk about situations and occurrences that would challenge them in normal conversation, Paul. And I think this is one of the greatest things about the work that you and some other notable researchers do, is that essentially it's like counselling and dealing with people's trauma, but in a strange field, really.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, and just briefly to stay with when we'll have a look at Wilsthorpe next if you want. I think everybody, after they've listened to me talk about Hummonby, realise I know more than what I'm saying. But it's a safe place for one reason, people. I'm not saying more than what I'm saying because I've given my word. There might come a time when I can, and once I get the green light, I will. And it makes an interesting case much better. But jumping to Wilsthorpe, I mean, that was 2009, and I don't think that, from my own point of view, I've encountered anything more prolific than the UFO activity throughout 2009. I don't know whether you've come across that, but particularly in eastern North Yorkshire, but they were a steady build-up of activity. And remember, in 2009, I knew nothing about what we've called the Wilsthorpe incident. I was just gathering. I had a website back then, which I started in 2004, called ILF UFO, Intelligent Life Forms. And I noted that all these reports were coming in: the light seen at Killam, the light seen in Driffield, physical structured craft seen in places. Riverside in Driffield seemed to feature a lot. On the East Yorkshire Wolds, myself and Steve Ashbridge were going out gathering all this information. Myself and Peter Masters, and Pete's not been very well, so I hope you're feeling better, Pete, if you're listening to this. We ended up down at the back of Wilsthorpe, literally on the road, but the sea would probably be 3/4 of a mile away, in a lay-by there, sat at the back of some police scientific investigation vans that were just empty in the darkness in September of, I think it was September of 2009, and we were parked at the back of this van. We didn't know why at the time. We didn't know that there were anything that we would ever call the Wilsthorpe incident. And then when I wrote the first book, local newspaper put an advert in for me saying I wanted to collect stories of strange and unusual, and an elderly couple got in touch with me to say that they lived at Wilsthorpe in the flats at Wilsthorpe. So anybody that's not familiar with this location, Google it. You'll see 16, I think there's 16 flats that were built in 1935. I think Ministry of Defence built them. And I've said it many times, if you go to the bottom of those gardens, you can throw a stone into the sea at high tide. And there's nothing to the right and there's nothing to the left. There's nothing to the right for miles, and there's nothing to the left for a considerable distance. And on this particular night, in which I did a bit of research and found the dates, it was September 2009, an elderly couple claimed that they'd seen a huge a huge circle of boomerang-shaped UFOs over the sea, but close in. Now, it's a long, flat beach, and we'll get to why I'm saying that in a moment. And this elderly lady said that she went to shut the flat up. They'd lived there. Some of these flats, Paul, holiday lets.
Yeah.
So there's 16. So let's say 8 or 9 of them are vacant or empty most of the time. And if they're not holiday lets, they're just second homes. Yeah. But they'd lived there for years and years and years. And her husband said he were off to bed. She went to lock up. There's a little porch outside, and there's an outside light that serves 4 flats essentially, and you've all got use of this light from your porch. And she thought, oh, he's left light on because it was illuminated. She turned light off, went in, and then she thought, hold on a minute, light's still on, and it weren't. And she went and looked at. As she's going in, she said a voice in her head said, "Go back and have another look." Or worse to that effect. She said, and I did. And over the sea, there's a huge circle of boomerang-shaped objects that are glowing from blue to white. She says, and the sea looked like a pan of boiling water within the circle. Now, let's not let these are an elderly couple, but let's not think that they're somehow misinterpreting what she's looking at. They've got binoculars on their window ledge. I've spent time in their flat. They've looked at the helicopters. They've looked at fishermen. They've looked at boats. They've been there over 30 years. She says a huge circle of boomerang-shaped objects over the sea. She shouts at her husband, who'd gone to bed. He comes and looks there in the ground floor flat. He looks, he's only there for a few minutes, and his exact words to me were, I'd seen enough. It terrified me. I didn't want to look at it. Went back to bed. He says, I put my head under the pillow, and that were it till the morning. I didn't want to know. And I said to the old lady, I said, what about you? She says, no, I'd never seen out like it, and I know I'm never going to see out like that again. She says, and I stayed and watched. And let's say it was 10 to 11. And I'm not saying that as though I'm plucking something out of the air. I think it was about 10 to 11. She says, I watched them, and I think the last one had gone just before midnight. And she said that they went away in twos until there were just one over the sea. And the following day, the military arrived. Now, it's close to what's called the Blythe Park Yacht Club. Mm-hmm. Sounds quite posh. You think of some marina with multi-million-pound yachts. No, it's not. Yeah. These are catamarans, and there's an old tractor that drags them down. And how do I know all this? Because my former son-in-law had a catamaran there. Yeah. So it's close to that. So the next day, the military arrived. And they requisitioned the yacht club compound because my son-in-law told me, because he were working down there. He didn't know anything about this. All this come out afterwards. And they stayed there for a number of days. Now, when I put Freedom of Information requests in, all I got back was that it was a military exercise. And I'm in no position to say it weren't. You know, this is where we're all lacking the proof. I'm not going to say, oh, no, it weren't. But I've got this story from this elderly couple. I've got all this UFO activity leading up to it and after it. Plus the farm that is at the back of these flats. There's a farm about a quarter of a mile away on the road, and he'd had UFO activity, which I've spoke to that guy. And so it's a military exercise, and I got the Freedom of Information request bumped back, which incidentally is just like a carbon copy of Kaz Clark's Penturk incident. Yeah. We've kind of compared notes, myself and Kaz Clark. Yeah. And it's a standard reply. All explosions were simulated. All gunshots were sort of blank firing. I haven't got the exact words in front of me. Yeah. Nobody reported any explosions or gunshots. This just a standard reply to this. It's different to the I've seen a light in the sky with that kind of reply, but this were a full blown incident. So did Wilsthorpe occur? Yeah, it did. Was it a military exercise? Could have been. From what they've described to me, though, it doesn't sound like it. And there's more witnesses to it. In Bridlington Harbour, there's a guy who sells bait to the fishermen and to the guys who go beach casting and the guys who go on the harbour for catching fish. And he employed bait diggers.
Yeah.
So at low tides, they would go and dig these lugworms up and all the razor clams or whatever they call them. It's a razor bills then, but that's a bird, isn't it? And so they'd dig bait. Now, obviously, the tides are dictated when you can go. They don't wait till daylight. If it's a very low tide in the night, they'll go with head torches and dig bait.
Yes.
This is the reason I said the beach will come into prominence. This circle of UFOs, this circle of objects over the sea. Now, the bait digger's boss said to me, with chest waders on, you can wade out over 100 yards on that beach without going over the top. So what were they doing there? What were the purpose of it? Because his bait diggers, prior to Wilsthorpe incident, but close to those flats, also told him and myself, because one of them still works for him, that they'd observed triangular-shaped objects entering the sea. They know it's impossible what they're saying because it's not deep enough. So, but we're not going to bend the argument to make it suit our narrative and say, it was half a mile out and it was deep enough. The triangular-shaped objects entering the sea. There's one in 2021 off there that came in as a Coast Guard report of a triangular-shaped object entering the sea. I put a Freedom of Information request in with the dates and everything, and it came back as there's nothing to report. Nobody's ever come to us with anything from that, which is interesting because in view of the person that told me about it and information that I had. But anyway, that one's another story. So, we got in chat tonight then, Paul. We got Daryl Cobb, Scotch Miss, Mag Sue, Andy Ghost Whisperer, Studio 211, Mike Murray, Susan Wiseman, Linny Ilbein, Mrs. Linny, Mia Girl. Let's have a look. There's loads of people in, and I do apologise because we've got over 250 people in. Bad Boy Channel. I hope you're good tonight, mate. And Jane Louise, I see you there. And I messaged your brother earlier today, Jane, but I'll try and speak to him in a week. So the Tony Dixon, Ian McFadden. Let's have a look. Yeah, and Gemma's doing moderating for us. Lee Roscoe's doing moderating, and Alison is doing the moderating. Zeno's in as well. So over to you, Paul. Sorry.
No problems. Yeah, it's as always, it's a lovely, friendly group with some excellent points as well. And it's like I say, it's always a positive space when we're doing these kind of things, Paul. In my experience of coming on as a guest, the other way around. I think the thing about Wilsthorpe that struck me when I first heard about it is that when you've got witnesses who are so detached from the phenomena as this old couple are, Paul, you would expect people, if they were going to make something up or pretend, to give you your traditional cliched flying saucer story. Boomerangs are one of those things that I think you have to have a certain amount of knowledge or a certain interest in that particular subject to even start coming across the cases.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know there are incredibly famous ones. Phoenix is probably the best example I can think of. And here we are almost 30 years later, and that's still rumbling on. But you've got to look at the people who have experienced this, the people that have shared this. There's no reason for them to make this up. If they have made it up, how do they have such a specific information in regards to this type of phenomena and how it appears and how people are viewing it? And there's the little details like seeing them sort of going in sort of an organised pairs, and off they shoot in different directions. You've got the churning, boiling of the seawater. It's one of those experiences that is so unusual that you can't not believe them, because that's their truth, Paul. And like you say, clearly when you've tried to chase down and get some authoritarian information in regards to this, they've just given you that generic thing, because like you say, nobody was talking about anything other than strange lights in the sky and the water reacting to it.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, after you, mate.
No, you're absolutely spot on. And I don't know if I ever spoke about it. I think I wrote about it, but the old lady, I'd love to be able to say her name. She's not even with us now, but out of respect, I won't.
Yes.
she liked to smoke. And she said in the evening she sat, bearing in mind, like I was just stressing to you people, there's nothing. There's a farm half a mile away at the back of her. There's nothing to the right or the left, and North Sea in front. She said, I sit outside on my little step and I'll have a cigarette. And because I said, did anything else happen after that? And she said, well, there were one thing, she said, and the ground's all undulating at the bottom of their garden. Picture sand dunes. She said, and one night, a few days afterwards, and, you know, somebody's going to pick up the book. I think it's in book 2. They're going to say, no, it was a week after or whatever. I can't remember. Very short time frame afterwards. She said, a row of red lights came along the top of the sand dunes, the top of the cliffs. And when we say cliffs, you can literally walk down them or run down them. A 4-year-old could. You're not going to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
And it stopped at the bottom of my garden. There was no fence. She says, and they're just red lights. And she said, it was something suggested to me. It was just people. There were tail lights of bikes, and it were people on push bikes. So something happened there. You don't get push bikes along there. There's no cycle track. The ground's uneven. It was pitch black, and she sat watching it, and a row of red lights came on, just stopped at the bottom of a garden. We're not talking 3 or 4, like, you know, we're talking about 12 red lights in a row. Yes. Which I found fascinating, and that's a part of you know, Wilsthorpe that I've not talked about much. But it doesn't stop there. You know, I thought it finished on September the 15th, 2009. So we assume it started in the actual event was the 14th. But I spoke to a lady called Carly. Who contacted me a few years ago, and I've been back and filmed Carly in her own home, and she was traveling home in November the same year. Now, where we stopped on that road, myself and Peter Masters, and we observed the police scientific investigation vans in September of 2009. There's nobody in these vans either. We couldn't understand that, but we were going there in response to UFO reports that we'd had off a lady called Eileen Hobson.
Yes,
from her home, and she'd observed these objects. So everything was happening then. She's coming home, so we forget about September. She's coming home in November. She's driving home with a work colleague down that road, past that junction, that pulling where we pulled in and saw the vans. So we're following a red car. I'm not going to say what car I can't remember what she said. Following a red car, she says, and it starts swerving all over the road. And we think, oh, he's either having some kind of episode, he's ill, or he's had too much to drink. And I'm observing him. And I've got my passenger in, this other female's in the car. She says, and suddenly my friend started screaming hysterically and going absolutely frightened out of her wits. She says, and I thought, what's happening? You know, I'm in control of this car. The car in front sort of skewed and pulled over in the road. Yep. She says, and I pulled round him, and she says, but when this girl's continuing to scream, this young woman, she says, and when I look to my right, down that hedge, which would parallel the flats at Wilsthorpe, she says, there's a hedge, a hawthorn hedge, hawthorn and other trees, which would be, I don't know, 15 foot high. She says, a huge object, a red light at one end, a red light at the other. The lights look to be about as big as dustbin lids, if anybody can remember. You're probably not as old as me, but about 30-inch round. Yes. She says, and there's a huge oval object that looks like gunmetal grey, just moving down, paralleling my car. She says, and it's at the other side of the hedge. It's in the field. She says, we got to the roundabout at Wilsthorpe, and this thing stopped, turned, and then just shot straight out to sea. That was November. So it didn't finish. Whatever was happening at Wilsthorpe didn't finish in September of 2009. And it certainly didn't start in September, because I'd got so many reports. Retired police officer, I can't think of his name, and I'd have said it if I could, because it were in the newspaper. And I went and traced him and went to his home. And he did. And this was in a place called Killam. You'll kill him. Yeah, yes. Yeah. Went to his, and you'll remember this. You probably read the book, haven't you? Yeah. And this Allroyd was his surname, and he told me that when he looked out from his home and looked up onto the fields, just in the sky above the field was a huge cross. So you, Paul, were talking about the diversity of the UFOs and the things that are seen, and we've got boomerang-shaped objects over the sea. We've got this huge I don't know, what would you call it? Cigar-shaped object with a red light either end. What Carly saw. We've got this retired policeman, David. They call him David Allroyd, and it's a cross. He says it just looks like a crucifix just flying through the sky. Why all that diversity? Why all those different things? Doesn't make sense. But why would it make sense to us? We're trying to make sense of it and put logic to it from a human perspective. We don't know the intentions or the motives of anything that's interacting with us, do we?
No. All the reasons why, Paul, often. Like you say, it's... I mean, when you've had to speak to cases where you've got multiple witnesses, Paul, have you ever had something similar to what happened at Wilsthorpe? That she seemed to be transfixed, hypnotised even, obsessed with what was going on in front of her. And the husband seemed to be absolutely terrified and just didn't want to know. Is that something that you've seen a lot of over the years? Or when you've spoken to people where people see the same thing and they have complete opposite emotional reactions to the events unfolding before them?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is something that happens. I mean, we know we're in these areas, and I know particularly you like the hauntings and the ghost hunting, or something you've been involved in the past. And I bet you've seen that, where some people are absolutely thrilled and enthralled by what's happening, and other people are absolutely terrified. Jumping to the elderly couple, Paul, I wonder who can say why, whether she were actually targeted to see that. Remember, she said she heard a voice inside her head say, go back and have another look. Yet her husband, when she shouted him, he was frightened to death. And his words were, I put my head under the pillow and I didn't want to lift my head from that pillow till morning. He said, he just terrified me, frightened him to death. Yet, and what about you? She said, oh, no, not me. I wanted to see it. I know I'm never going to see it like that again in my life. Never have before and never will again. So... So yeah, it does affect everybody in different ways, and maybe we targeted, Paul. Maybe that's the reason. Why do you think you're involved in this, Paul? What's driving you within this subject, do you think?
I just find it fascinating. I have to say, I've always been intrigued by it, and the more I've learnt, and the more I've read, and the more I've spoken with people from around the world, the more my interest has increased. It's something, I think it's like a never-ending well of weirdness, really, Paul. I think, especially when you're talking to people in other countries and you're being taken to places you've only ever seen on TV in most situations, or you know very little about. And so when you get to speak to people out there in, places like Florida and Tennessee and British Columbia and Australia, and they're boots on the ground and they're dealing with some of these cases that you've only had the input of reading about previously, to get somebody's actual conversation about what's going on, I think just gives it a whole new level for you. And then you just can't stop. And then you suddenly begin to find yourself becoming more open-minded. You become more interested in certain things, because I have to say, really, 10 years ago, I didn't know much about high strangeness. There were certain areas that I was aware of, like Skinwalker or Bridgewater. But in general, it's a whole aspect of this field of Forteana that I wasn't really very well up on. And so it's continuing to keep going. Like I've often said on my show, I always used to thought I was pretty switched on and was quite well read when I started the show. And it took me about a year to realise I actually knew bugger all, really.
Do you think it's not a bad way to look at it? Because, and I mean this, everybody in chat will be more well read than I am, because I hardly read anything. I didn't read anything to write the books because I didn't want anything to taint what I was thinking and my thoughts. But, I mean, you've got a vast knowledge of the subject. But just before we go on to anything else, are you okay for time still, Paul?
Absolutely fine, my friend.
Because I see Steve Stockton's in. And this Steve Stockton, if you're listening to this, you need Paul Bestall on Mysteries, Missing Persons Mysteries, which is an absolutely huge channel. He's a great friend and a great supporter. He's been a massive help. And I suggest anybody in chat, if you're not familiar with Missing Persons Mysteries, get over to Steve Stockton's channel, have a look, like and subscribe, and same with Paul Bestall. So let's just take a minute to, where can people find you, Paul?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters on YouTube and across all podcast sites, and as well as visiting mysteriesandmonsters.com, which is my website.
Absolutely. And you'll always find you're just a fair person to talk to. I couldn't have thought anybody better to do this with. And as I say, it was just a reaction to the guy who dropped the question saying, Paul, don't talk about cases anymore.
Yeah.
It's more interesting. It's what I don't know, shop talk or something, as I say. And I really mean it. It's no dig at you. It's the kick up the backside I needed, because I do like talking about cases. It's just that usually I'm at the receiving end of it, and I've got somebody like Paul Bestall or Steve Stockton asking me questions which I can respond to. But if it's just me putting it out there, I just dropped away from that. But there'll be more of it if that's what you guys want.
Yeah, absolutely.
See Dragonborn's in as well. Good to see you, Mark Farnell and John Paul Body. I've been working on your case, John. I saw Gareth Hawkins in earlier. I've just about done your Bempton case, mate. So that will be going out shortly. Give us a shout tomorrow if you want to know any more. But go on, Paul. Sorry.
I suppose as well, one of the things, the strange thing that always makes me chuckle is obviously there are two things about Bridlington that I knew about prior to us meeting, as it were, Paul, which was one of my very favourite haunted cases. Fish and chip. Well, I love a fish and chips as well. Was the infamous case of the haunted boat, the Pickering, Paul, which was obviously in the 90s. Have you ever crossed paths with anybody involved in that?
I have, yeah. But funnily, you should say that. And I didn't. None of this is planned, people. So he's just thrown this one on me, and I can't go into great detail for no other reason than I haven't got great detail. But there's two fishermen that I don't know whether they're both working in Bridlington now on the harbour. Renowned fishermen, Tom and Dave Quinn, great guys, good friends. And Tom's the guy that retrieved, the Navigator from ZA610 when it crashed on December the 12th, 1985. Tom's the guy, which is fascinating because Tom's also the guy that retrieved the man that crashed in the Cessna.
Yes.
And I can't remember the date of that one. Come on, Paul. Something tells me it's 1987. But
Yes.
But both times it was on the same boat. He was fishing on a boat called the Betty. But that weren't what you asked. You asked about the haunted trawler, and Dave, Tom's brother, did work on that. And all he told me, Tom gave me the book, a book with the story in. And true to form, I've probably not read it. But he gave me the book, but Dave said he worked on it. He says, and it was a strangely. You don't know whether by talking about something you create an atmosphere for other people, or whether there's anything truly strange there.
Yeah.
But he definitely said it was strange. He said things would move. Things got moved about. He said it were always cold. We're talking about in North Sea on a trawler, but I dare say that they're not always cold. But those were the comments. But it might be one that, if people are interested, I'll get in touch with Dave and get some more information, because he definitely went to sea on that vessel and he's definitely got information about it. Sorry, guys, you can see my interest in the ghost phenomena, but if you guys have got it, then I'll do a bit of digging for you.
I just think it's a really interesting case because obviously it was quite well reported at the time, Paul. It became very infamous. It's probably, you would suggest, the best example of a boat-based haunted we've had in the UK. Yeah. Really. Numerous witnesses. Obviously, the infamous Reverend Tom Willis, I think. Tom Willis.
Do you know, you took my words, because I'll let you carry on in a moment, but Tom Willis also visited this house that I live in. So go on anyway. That's
exactly where I was going to go to, because I remember when you wrote about that, Paul, because obviously this was all wrapped up in these strange bags of, as you later discover, is probably automatic writing. Do you think sometimes you look back at that and think, what the bloody hell was going on? Because it's strange anyway when you've moved to a new place, Paul, and a reverend turns up trying to talk to you about it. But also, on top of everything that you were beginning to uncover there as well, do you think that's the kind of encounter you wished you'd had 10 years later?
What do you mean? So I could have actually
a bit more switched on, as in who he was and what was going on.
Who he was, what was going on, and imagine all that information that I could have retained instead of burning it in a big 45-gallon oil drum. Yeah. Now, we weren't doing questions tonight, but this will relate in a way So Dragonborn says there has to be a connection between what happened to you in childhood, Paul, and what's happening at Bempton and others. What are your thoughts, please? Well, we might not answer exactly that, Dragonborn, but that's the only question we will take tonight because it just sort of fits in with what Paul's asking. Because what happened in childhood sort of stopped at the age of about 14 for me. Life goes on, you get a job, you get married. A few things happened, but nothing of any great magnitude. And I don't mean I forgot about what had happened in childhood, but I had not told Mary anything really, not said anything. And then we moved here in 1993. I don't know what month, but we moved here in 1993 and it literally started again.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it started a year later. It started within days of moving here. Things were happening, and it were happening for Mary. It were, you know, it were just alive with activity. And you know, Paul, this is why I sometimes say, I wonder if everything in our lives is planned, which is frightening, really, because it implies that there's somebody got automation over your life and everybody's in chat's life, and that might not be the case, but it's just weird. Too coincidental that we moved into a property where people had been performing some kind of magic or some kind of something nefarious, something had been happening in that property. And just to fill people in, when we moved in, there was letters all over in bags, bin liners full of letters, and all the writing, you know, you'd have italic writing, and then you'd have some other type of writing, and then you'd have a different colour pen, all on the same page. And it all made no sense to Paul Sinclair, who'd not had an experience since 14, and then arriving there at, say, 28, 29, I don't know how old I can't remember, but that were past. It's all still in my head, but it were past. And suddenly I'm reading like this woman saying, I have your eyes, and please look carefully, and all that kind of thing. And we're just burning them. There's bags of them. We're just burning them. And then you're taking the floorboards up and underneath. I mean, Gemma's in chat. Gemma's up doing moderating. She remembers a lot of this. She's second eldest. Floorboards up, and there's a crucifix. You know, when you take the floorboards up, people, where there'd be a light fitting and you'd have the wiring, so you'd have a loose board. That's the only reason. I don't mean all over, but you take a floorboard up because that's my job, and we're revamping this house. Yeah. And there'd be a page of the Bible, or there'd be a Saint Christopher, and they were all over the place. You'd strip the wallpaper off in what would Sarah's bedroom upstairs. And I apologise if I'm jumping all over the place here, people, but there's pentagrams and there's other symbolism on the walls, and then it didn't at the time, Paul. So you're right when you said you wish that you would have known 10 years later. I think we're probably looking at 20 years later, to be honest. Yeah. What you know, because why did Reverend Millis arrive? Because he obviously knew. He obviously knew that, and he wanted to bless the house, and he said he'd been there before. He obviously knew. And when he got to the top of the stairs, and I don't know whether Sarah is listening to this, because back me up on my words, Sarah, she was eldest. She followed us upstairs, and he went, I wouldn't let your children sleep in this room. That was the room. It was Sarah's room, and I looked, and Sarah stood there, said, I think you better leave. You know, and that's a bit nice. You know, the guy would, you know, he knocked on the door and offered to bless the house and then walk round the rooms. But that was the Reverend Tom Willis, the exorcist, and he was renowned, weren't he? You know this. Yep. And anyway.
Absolutely. There didn't seem to be many a haunting in Yorkshire he didn't find himself involved in the 90s, Paul, it would seem.
But by the same token, Paul, he weren't invited. So who would put Tom Willis up to that? There's a book there. I've often thought about starting a book and having a go at writing a book about Tom Willis. And his exploits, should we say, because he was an interesting guy.
Absolutely, yeah, very much so. Some excellent cases, not only that, but like you said, as you touched on there, and I think sometimes we can find ourselves in situations sometimes, Paul, in our life, even in the most mundane reasons, that you will make a decision maybe sometime to do something at a specific time, and you do it, and something happens that your presence being there has helped. I mean, speaking from personal experience, many years ago, I decided to randomly go to my local supermarket in the afternoon, just to kill some time before I went to matching evening. I went in, bumped into a friend and a mum doing their shopping, just randomly. It was like a Tuesday lunchtime, I think it was, Paul. And she said, "Oh, how are you doing? How are you getting home?" I said, "Oh, I was just going to get a taxi." She said, "Don't be daft. If you wait for me, I'll give you a lift because I have to go past your house to go home." So I said, "Fine." Waited for her. We went home, and as we were on our way up to my house, her mum had a heart attack in the front seat of the car,
Wow.
and I saved her mum's life.
Yeah. So you were there to. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And it was literally the spur of the moment, Paul. An hour before, I thought, right, I'm going to the supermarket right now. If I'd have been 10 minutes later or 10 minutes earlier, we wouldn't have bumped into each other and her mum had died.
Mm-mm.
So sometimes you kind of think, is there somebody pulling, not necessarily pulling the strings, but sometimes are we guided, not all the time, but on occasion to do things or change locations or move to a place or be at home? Like the chances of you being at home when the Reverend came round
Yeah.
would probably be quite rare, especially you just moved in, you're working, you've got a house full of kids, it's hectic. So the chances of that happening and you being there is also quite strange, really.
Absolutely, and like you've just said, and why did he turn up, and why Paul Sinclair, who's now saying he's had all these strange experiences as a child, why did we drop on that particular property?
Yeah.
Why did everything just kick off again? Because I never wrote about any of this, I don't know, till 2014, 2015. And it had always been in there. I can remember going for a Chinese, me, Mary, and a group of people. And I can remember it was summer and I'd got a shirt on with no sleeves and I'd got all these holes in my arm. And I don't mean like one or two, and they're not the ones that have left scars, because I've got all these that have left scars. These were like the size of match heads, but all little holes. And I knew what had happened. And I can remember this woman saying to me, "What you done there?" I said, I don't know. I said, "It must be some chemical I've worked with at work,
Yeah.
And I knew what had happened. It were happening straight away. It were a terrifying time, to be honest with you. I can remember we had a Labrador called Rupert, lovely dog. And the staffy all at the same time. And dogs were going crazy in the night. They were absolutely going nuts. And we were in the back bedroom.
Yeah.
And I'm looking out of the back bedroom window. And I opened the window, sash window. And I'm looking out. And it's all in darkness. You've got next door's garden. There's a shed. And I saw this red glow coming down the garden. I don't think I've ever even talked about it. I'm pretty sure I never wrote about it. And it's slowly lighting the gardens up. As it goes along, it lit their shed roof up and it lit our garden up all in a crimson light.
Yeah.
And as I've got the window open, I can see it above, and it's a red object that's just there stationary for a moment. Then it goes all the way down, and then it just shot out to sea like a rocket. Just crazy little cameos in your mind of events that mean nothing really, because we haven't got an ounce of proof. We're going up onto those cliff tops, Paul. And I keep dropping these names because they're not dropping these names. They're just as involved as me. So there's me, there's Pete, there's Linny, Bob when he's well enough. And Mark comes up now. Although Mark don't get as involved, he's just as interested. Yeah. And I think to ourselves, what we do, we don't need the proof. We're all experiencing it. We're all having a little touch of the strangeness. But when I'm doing the live streams, and if I said to Linny, "Do you want to come on and have a natter?" or Jeremy? We'll get Jeremy on because he's quite interested in Jeremy as much as I. So we have a laugh with each other. And what we're trying to do is gather some kind of proof. It's a kind of validation for what you're talking about. Yeah. We've got strange lights in sky. We've got Linny's thermal footage of this strange object on the hill. None of this has been capitalized on enough. The strange lights that we've all filmed and the thermal footage. And it really needs doing. I don't know what it's telling us, by the way. I don't know what we're looking at. I wish I did. There'll be some people listen to this afterwards and say, "Oh, I'll tell you what that is, and that's the Pleiadians, or that's the star seeds." And I'm not knocking you people if that's what you think, but really, you don't know, do you?
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Do.
As a child, I looked at these things, and I remember I've got a few little memories of seeing them close up and personal. Yeah. And I wouldn't know whether they were aliens or demons. I wouldn't know what they were, and I'm not gonna stick a label on them because I'm more interested in the UFO side of it, because I just quite honestly don't have a clue. Just don't have a clue. But I'm not going to deny that I saw them. It's the weirdest thing to be talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
How are you for time, Paul?
I'm fine, mate.
Okay.
You're all right with me. If you're not bored of me, I'm not bored of you, buddy. Don't
You're in
worry.
charge.
So, I suppose that would have been quite difficult for you at that point when it started again, Paul, because I would imagine you'd managed to, as we often say, you've managed to compartmentalise that. You've put that part of your life away. It's back in when you were a young lad. You've got it all wrapped up with your feelings of shame, of frustration, of being frightened. Trauma, absolutely. And so to lock that away for 10, 15 years, even keep it from the woman you've married, I would imagine that was probably the worst thing you had to deal with, because then you were having to deal with the realisation, I suspect, Paul, that sooner or later Mary's going to find out that something's gone on, and this isn't the first time it's happened to you. Was that probably the biggest barrier for you to deal with?
It was a barrier. You know, I don't think anybody's ever asked that, you know, because you're telling somebody something that even now, I mean, I think Sarah's at 41, so we've been married 43 years. And Mary's still not really deeply involved within the subject. She'll watch this live stream maybe while she's watching TV. It might be on a laptop and she'll just observe. But she's not deeply involved, yet she's experienced things. And I think that's how people go through life. I'll get back to what you were saying in a moment, but some people, they're just not going to get hooked onto it. She's woke up. We spoke about this. I can't think who was in our house a few days ago, and we spoke about this. And Mary says, just little things. She said, I woke up the other night. This is when it was happening in the 1990s. You were asleep and the room was full of mist, but it were all level with bed. And there were little beings in the room. And then what, Mary? And what? I don't know. I just remember waking up and seeing them. And you know, you don't, and that's her input. Mary's and there's loads of little cameos of things like that happening. Gemma, who's in chats, had things happen, not on the same scale as her sisters. This is what I like about Gemma. She's doing moderating, bit of a loose cannon, Gemma, you know, because she really is. I've told her, just be careful, be good. But she's not like her sisters. They've experienced more. You know, they've seen and experienced more. Sarah, I know this isn't where we were going with question, but Sarah said she woke up. We had a mastiff, English mastiff dog, lovely dog, but it didn't come upstairs. So something was happening, and she always remembers this. She said she woke up in the night, and the mastiff was in the bedroom, on the bed. There's a pup. She says, and there's a man sat on end at bed. And she said he'd got a black hat on and a black suit, and he's just looking at her. She said she got up and went to the toilet and come back and went to bed, and he was still there. Now, this is either some bizarre dream or she's hallucinated, but she's carried that thought and that memory, and you know, and come out with it. They've all had some kind of experience, and you know, and I won't go into what's happening at the moment or potentially happening with some of the other children. These aren't children, these are grown women. But so does it, your next question might be, does it follow a bloodline? I'm not sure, because my dad never really said anything and my mum didn't. So unless it's just from that generation where they're just closed down, you know, I don't know. I jumped away from your question and I can't remember it now, so I'm sorry.
That's all right. I was just saying that the difficulty of opening up about your experiences in your life, Paul, like you say, it's going to be difficult. I think anybody who's had a strange experience, when you are in a situation or you're talking about these things, and obviously depending on how deep-seated the trauma is from what you've experienced, I mean, it's like, you know, I grew up in a haunted house. I treat it quite amusingly, looking back. But at the time, I would imagine it was quite frightening. As I've said, you know, some people just didn't want to come round. Whereas, you know, I'm 6 years old and I think it's really interesting what's going on. So I suppose it depends on what's happened and where you've been and where you're going to go, that you have to deal with these kinds of things. And I think the fact that your children have all been able to be open about this, Paul, but also you've been able to keep that relationship and have that respect without them thinking, I think my dad's a bit of a nutter.
My dad's a nutter. Well,
they've been able to grow with you in that regard.
Yeah, you're right. But, you know, jumping to it, you know, and I'm talking about people in the chat now, as well as what I've gone through, or things that you've gone through, or the people that you know, Paul. It is a trauma. You can understand it, this PTSD, for people who've had massive trauma, when they've been in conflict and things.
Yeah.
And it drives a person mad simply because there's nowhere to share it. There's the experience is so inexplicable and so difficult for you even to deal with in your own mind. So to begin trying to tell somebody about it's a non-starter. So you can understand, Paul, why people actually box these things off. And I don't even mean from the paranormal side of things. I mean from other aspects of life where they've had absolutely horrific trauma and they just close down. They don't talk about it, and it's easier to deal with, isn't it, by just boxing it off? But I couldn't when it started again in 1993. It just literally brought it back instantly, and it were awful, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine, but also I suspect that's probably been one of the driving forces for what you've done in the 30 years since, Paul, because you've not run away from it. You've not tried to hide it. You've not, as that old guy did, you've not put your head under the pillar and hoped it went away. You've faced up to it. You've moved forward. You've opened up to your family about what happened to you, and you've gone on and started searching for answers beyond the threshold of your front door. Whereas it would have been very easy, if not easier, Paul, to box it off, to leave it there and hope that it just buggered off and didn't come back.
Well, you're spot on. And do you know something, Paul? I think, and I don't just mean myself, I think a lot of people who've spoken about it and a lot of people who don't speak about it are desperate for the day when we become kind of vindicated, as in openly, some official body. I don't know why it takes an official body, but you will find that the populace, the sheeple, will only believe it if they're watching some kind of news broadcast. And I'm not saying it'll come like that, but if something came out from some official source that some of the people that have claimed that they've been touched by this strangeness, phenomena is the best way to say it, you might have thought they were cuckoo, you might have thought they were crazy, but it turns out that they've been telling the truth all along. When I wrote Night People, I spoke with Whitley Strieber, and Whitley said, "Are you sure you want to go ahead with it?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Just be sure." He said, "Because when you do, once you've just opened that box," he says, you can't go back. I mean, and this is the guy who wrote probably the most famous abduction book in the world, Communion. Absolutely. And that's what he said to me. And I'm glad I did. I'm not going to be ashamed of talking about what I know I experienced, whereas before I just shut it off completely, which a lot of people do.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, if you're going to get input from somebody, Paul, Whitley is the person to talk about, because I mean, obviously you know him very well.
No, I've not spoke to him for a while now, if I'm being truthful, but I've had plenty of conversations, but yeah.
And I think people look at Communion sometimes in a bit of a bubble, and they don't see what happened to him outside of that. There's a horrendous footage of him, I think, being interviewed by Larry King in the early 90s, and they're talking about what happened to him. That basically, he was sexually assaulted, and they'd start laughing at him. And you would think, yes, I know we're talking about alleged alien contact or whatever. Can you imagine if they'd done that if it was a woman talking about being sexually assaulted?
Well, it wouldn't have happened, would it? There'd have been an uproar, wouldn't there? But that's just the way of things. I mean, we've moved on now, haven't we? And I think when you look at it, Paul, and when you look at the things that people talked about years ago, and now we've discovered that the potential for other life forms is out there. I mean, jumping away from Whitley, but if we'd have gone back 50 years and said, I think there's going to be life on other planets in other galaxies, they'd have said we're the only living planet with the blue planet, the sort of sphere of existence in the entire universe. But now they think that it's swimming with life. Yeah. I wonder what them scientists who suppressed everybody's ideas and thoughts were back then. I wonder what they'd think now if they were alive today and looked at the discoveries that have come in the years, in the years that followed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at at the theories that used to get knocked about 100, 120 years ago, and you'd get all these people saying that they could see all these canals on Mars and they could see the aliens and stuff, and that was like a worldwide sensation, Paul. And it was only with the development of photography and telescopes that we were able to say, well, yeah, Mars looks very strange, but there's not people flying about it on hot air balloons. But we're now in a position where we've heard the wind on Mars, we've seen the sunrise on Mars, we've seen a Martian earthquake, we've seen a moonquake. If you'd have told me as a young lad at 10 that I would be alive to see the sunrise on another planet, I'd have laughed in your face, Paul.
That sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? It's amazing, isn't it? But yeah, you're right. Just before I don't know where we're going next with this, but I just want to put this up. It's not in caps, but I'm interested in this if you want to get in touch with me. One Drew saw an orange light under the water in Filey Bay last night, moved rapidly, then disappeared. Please get in touch. My email address, which is Paul Sinclair, all lowercase, ilf@gmail.com. I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I suppose as well, Paul, you've kind of come a long way, really. Did you ever consider, if you look at where you were before the first Truth book came out, now you've written 5 books, you've done a brilliant documentary, you're filming another one, your reputation has increased exponentially in the last 10 years. Does it sometimes stagger you a little bit to see how you've developed? Because I would imagine a joiner from Mexborough wouldn't have ever thought he'd write 1 book, never mind 5.
No, absolutely. And you're spot on. You've said it just how I would say it. And I wondered who I was talking to the other day. And it was my daughter, Jess, and her husband, Nick, who are both teachers. And we were talking about things. We were at their home. And I said, I think at school, and I've no problem saying this, I'll probably thickest person in school when it comes to maths. English, I were really good at putting words together and sort of battling through and coming up with interesting things and sort of nice little phrases to wind people up. And I were good at that. But when it comes, I wouldn't know what a noun were or a verb were. I was absolutely poor. So to then write the books and on that, nobody's written them for me. My spelling's atrocious, so I've had people help me with the spelling. Can't deny that. Well, Word documents are great for helping you with spelling, but yeah, to actually, you think, where's all that come from? From being someone who was absolutely, what's the word? Well, let's simplify it, thick. I don't know, there's 239 people in chat, and people are going to listen to this afterwards. I don't mind saying that. I like throwing things out to people, different ideas and things, and like there's obviously something of interest coming out of the brain, but. Yeah. When it came to my school days, I was pretty much. I don't even think I was average. Great at art, really good at art, really, really good at art. And there's other things that people would surprise you of. In like one that I will talk about it. If I were ever going to be good at anything in my life, it would have been boxing. Yeah, seriously. I remember going to the gym and seeing people stood around the ring saying wicked right hook, wicked left shot, and lifted left hook. And I didn't know I was doing it. It were a natural talent. Yeah. And then you think to yourself, because everybody can relate to this, you think to yourself, you'll get people saying, well, you've got to do it now. Don't wait. You'll regret it when you're older. So is that a big regret? It certainly is. Yeah, absolutely. Because I know I could have been good at that because I'm really driven by it. But I think what got in way were beer, my wife, girlfriends, you know what I mean? And life takes over. But it's not quite unexplained phenomena, people, but you just get under the skin of people, don't you? So you get to know a little bit.
Yeah. I suppose sometimes, Paul, when you look at what's going on now, do you still enjoy it as much? Do you still have as much passion for this? If anything, has it increased the more you've done it?
Yeah, it's definitely increased. Absolutely. I love it. I mean, there's nothing I like better than getting out with people and going to these locations, or you get a really interesting email. And I've got piles and piles of emails. So for the people that say, well, I've sent him an email, he responded, but then he hadn't done it. There's literally loads, but I will get to them. I want to give people what they deserve when you're looking into these things. And obviously some of them are far too in depth, or some of them are a little bit more trivial, but I'll always reply to people. So yeah, I'm just as enthusiastic, and I'm really grateful that you've come on and helped tonight with this, because, excuse me, I were at a loose end tonight as regards whether to do a podcast or not, simply because we're also caring for an elderly relative who's got something quite debilitating, and we're not carers. It's not for money or out, but that's consuming loads of time. And and I know that people don't want to hear that tonight, but that's the reason I'm all over the place at the moment.
Well, you ask, Paul. I'll always come and help whenever I can. You've always helped me out over the time with your time, your company. Giving me a tour of Bempton when I came over a couple of years ago, and strange things.
Well, I'm hoping you're going to get up there again.
Oh, absolutely. The sooner the better, I think, my man. I think the last thing I want to touch on, and this is a personal thing from me, giving you something to find out more for me, if you can, on top of the Pickering pull, some homework, perhaps.
Go on, then.
So, I had my 40th in Bridlington.
Okay.
And we stayed at a place called the Revelstoke.
Yeah, I know it well.
My brother was pulled out of bed by his feet at 3 a.m.
Okay.
We've asked the hotel. We spoke to the staff at the time. They didn't want to talk about it. I just want to know, was that a one-off, or does that place have a history of hauntings?
Right. Well, I'll definitely look into that for you. The landlord used to be a guy called Ray Vodden from Barnsley.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And I think one of his sons now runs the spot. I could be wrong, but I've got a good friend who's friends with them. And this is a new one to me, so it's fascinating. So we'll have a look at the Revelstoke Hotel, which is literally 400 yards from where I'm sat now.
Yeah. September 2012 it happened, Paul.
Okay. Right. And I definitely will. We'll have a look at that, Paul.
It was very strange as well. Where's it gone? In fact, I'll show you. I'd actually taken, for some light reading at the time, I'd taken that with me.
Now then, that's interesting, isn't it, though?
Yeah.
Do you think that I think people know where I'm going with this. They can almost read what I'm going to say before I open my lips or my mouth. But do you think that somehow set the mood for what might have happened later that night?
It could have done. I mean, there was a strange thing happened with that book as well, because it vanished.
Well, you've got it there.
Disappeared. No, I know. So we got there on the Friday, and on the Saturday I was looking for it to read, and it had gone. Couldn't find it anywhere. And then on the Sunday, as we were packing to put all the stuff in, because we'd had a golfing weekend, so we were packing to go away, and I thought, where is this bloody book? Where's it gone? And I started moving stuff about, and I found it round the back of the bed, and it looked like it had been there 20 years, Paul. I've never seen a book as dusty in my life. The room wasn't dirty or dusty.
No.
But this book looked like it had been... This book looked like it had been in an attic for 20 years. It was filthy. I had to ask him to borrow Hoover so I could clean it up. Yeah. And it was covered in cobwebs and dust. It was crazy. It was just a really weird thing. And I was glad something odd happened to somebody else rather than me, Paul, because that kind of gives you validation that something strange is going on.
I'll definitely do a little bit of digging into that, because it's a great reputation. It's a great food as well, Revelstoke. Yes. If anybody
I agree.
Want to visit
food was fabulous.
Absolutely. So if you've got time, one last thing then, because I know ghosts are your thing.
Yeah.
What if then there are no such thing as ghosts? What if we're creating the ghost? And just bear with me one moment. And I talked about it the other day. So the extreme trauma, extreme loss.
Yeah.
So, and you concentrate on the loved one, even a pet. I'll say even. I don't even say that lightly, because I'd be devastated if I lost my little dog. But so we're pouring all that thought and emotion in, and then we hear people say, and I think this happens more frequently than we even dare to imagine, because it's so deep and personal that I think a lot of people keep it to themselves. Oh, Mum stood at the bottom of my bed. Oh, I looked out of my window and I saw Mum stood on the path, and then she just kind of faded away. What if we're creating these projections? What implications does that have for people who believe in the afterlife? What if there is no afterlife and we're creating these? I'm not saying we are. I'm just throwing it out there. What do you think?
I certainly think some cases are, definitely. I certainly think however the energy is manifesting itself, Paul, because at the end of the day, we're just meat-filled batteries. That's what we are. You know, we're full of energy. We're all full of electricity. That energy can't be destroyed when we die. So it must go somewhere, become something. I think if it was that easy, we would probably have more stories, personally. But I certainly think that there are some encounters and experiences that people have where they have projected something externally. And I'm not just necessarily talking about telekinesis or anything like that. I know several of the world's greatest poltergeist investigators are a big believer that poltergeists are simply energy batteries of some description, and they act in a very chaotic way because it's some form of energy we're not aware of. Now, how that manifests in attacking certain people or vocalizing or even seeing shadows and figures, I'm not too sure, but you could certainly see some kind of energy release in things being flown across a house or something, and things moving in the air and furniture being moved around. So definitely, I think as with any sort of theory, I think you very quickly run up against experiences where that explanation hits a dead end. But as with anything, I certainly think that there are certain aspects that, yes, you definitely could. And not necessarily, you would say, I don't know, maybe it's akin to some kind of emotional tulpa, that you need that manifestation in whatever way, whether it's hearing a noise, hearing their voice, seeing a fleeting image out the corner of your eye, or just getting that sense, like people who say they have pets and the pets pass away, and then a couple of weeks later they experience that familiar jumping on the bed. It's the comforting of it, and it's that kind of thing. So I think there's certainly some cases of that. Absolutely, mate.
Well, thank you. And just before, I don't know whether you are going to close this down now, Paul, but just before we do, I'm assuming there's going to be have been quite a few questions. And thanks, Gemma, Alison, and thanks, Lee, for moderating. And most of all, thanks, Paul Bestall. But I'm assuming there's going to be some questions. What I'll do, I'll collect the questions that are kind of relevant. I'm not going to cherry pick, but I'll collect them, and we'll address some of them either Thursday or next Sunday. That way, you haven't wasted your questions. Because I appreciate it, but I knew this one was going to be a little bit different.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Once again, thank you as always for asking me. As I said to you, mate, I'm always up for helping and speaking with you. I love spending time in your company. I love chewing over these theories and facts and just throwing things around and just having a nice, positive, respectful conversation about high strangeness. It's always been a pleasure when I've spoken to you, Paul, and I'm glad I've got to know you over the years, mate. So thank you again for inviting me.
You're welcome, and you've really sort of made my night tonight, and it's been great taking a few questions from you. And if you want to find Paul Bestall, it's Mysteries and Monsters. Like and subscribe to Paul's channel, because it's a great channel, and as you can see from this hour and a half of chat that we've just had, he's a fair guy to talk to. So shall we end it at that, Paul?
Absolutely. Thank you again, and thanks to everybody who's enjoyed it tonight. It's been a real pleasure for me, so thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Oh, wow.
Saw it twice, so I was like, oh my god.
That was just weird.
I always used to see a light coming up,
Yeah.
like a headlight, but there was nobody there.